So, if you've even seen a tiny glimpse of my channel lately, you know I've been eagerly awaiting the release of the Teal Mask DLC. And of course, I played it immediately as it came out. So, what do I think of it? Well, where do I begin? I guess I'll start by saying that Sword and Shield's DLC never really spoke to me too much. I did my best to remain enthusiastic, but it never really did too much for me overall, and it was a bit of a struggle for me to stay interested. But it's not bad? I've definitely talked about this or alluded to it in the past, but I just think Scarlet and Violet has clicked with me more overall personally, and its DLC also connects to what I liked about the game a bit more too, at least in my opinion. Kitakami is probably the most lively place in the game, being a bit more filled than any other area in one place, but it does mean that the game's performance tanks. Yeah, it has some serious issues in the main game. We all know that all too well, but it is more noticeable at times here. Is it at its absolute worst? I guess it's hard to say since I know some players experience more lag than others when Scarlet and Violet initially launched, but it happens more than I'd like. But that's not new. I guess it just means that this aspect of the game hasn't exactly improved in a substantial way. So if these performance issues killed the game for you in the first place, then this isn't gonna change your mind at all. If it didn't bother you, then it's hardly the end of the world. Sorry if this isn't exactly what you wanted me to talk about first, but unfortunately, this is a pretty noticeable aspect of Scarlet and Violet, so I kind of have to bring it up even if it's a bit of a tiresome subject at this point. So, one of the first characters we're introduced to in Teal Mask is Briar, who is from the Blueberry Academy, which is from Unova. Obviously, some of our brains go back to speculating about a black and white remake or some other kind of Unova game, like a Legends type of thing. But for now, let's not get too carried away with this. I find her connection to the main game pretty interesting, being a descendant of Heath, the author of the Scarlet and Violet book in-game, and she has a clear motivation to prove his theories correct. Speaking of other regions like Unova, there's also a bit of a Johto vibe here. This was leading to speculation about some kind of Johto-related content, or even a game in the future too, before the DLC even came out. The camera mode in-game can now even play the Johto wild battle music. It's hard to ignore aspects of the setting overall, as well as the fact that it feels like Johto Pokemon feel more available in Scarlet and Violet than some other Pokemon regions, besides maybe Kanto of course. Also, I've seen some people point out that this was also the case with Legends Arceus. And yeah, that was another game with an old-fashioned Japanese culture aesthetic. This is all just conjecture and speculation, but I do think it's worth thinking about the Johto vibe side of this too while we are on that subject. And of course, you guys know I love the Johto games, despite their flaws. So obviously, when it comes to positives, I'm a fan of the Pokemon available, like Hoot Hoot and Vulpix. And I like the 3 Legends story. But I think the characters we get to spend some time with stuck with me a little more than anything else in the grand scheme of things. 2 of the major characters that will be associated with Teal Mask are Carmine and Kieran. I like them both, though many will find Carmine unbearable. I mean, you saw the thumbnail. Carmine is, pretty mean and kind of dense sometimes. There were a couple times where I just straight up cringed for Kieran. Carmine basically is one of the biggest roots of Kieran's inferiority complex. It's one thing to interact with her as the player, someone that doesn't have to be around her all the time. But Kieran does have to be around her all the time. Sometimes it's just her being naive. But other times, sheesh. She's just ridiculous sometimes. I actually still do enjoy her character and all of her unlikable glory, but I definitely wouldn't want to be around her too much in real life, or would want to be related to her, especially as a younger brother. But it's Kieran that feels a bit more interesting, even though it is partly due to Carmine. Throughout the DLC, it kind of felt like I was watching some kind of villain origin story. Every time you beat him in a battle, he takes it worse and worse. I felt genuinely kind of bad beating him sometimes. I mean, it's not like he's doing worse than Gita, the region's champion. at least before I stepped in. But he is probably the most important character in the DLC. A big reason is also the fact that it's pretty clear that some of these characters will be showing up in the next DLC release, and it's pretty clear that Kieran will also return in Newfound Determination. The final scene ends with a pretty ominous cliffhanger, and I hope that they live up to that, since I am pretty curious to see where his character ends up going next. Everyone complains about the new arrivals being too nice, so some of you may finally be getting what you wanted. And you know what? That's a pretty good testament to this DLC. It made me want to see what happens next. They did a pretty good job with the character and world building, and this feels like a good continuation of the themes explored in the base game of Scarlet and Violet. But it also makes me wish that more of those characters appeared in the DLC. Arven and Penny in particular would have been extremely interesting to see interact with Carmine, as there's no way there wouldn't have been some conflict there over her attitude toward Kieran, especially Penny. Nimona could have been fun too, but it's Arven and Penny that would have made more of an addition of story substance when it comes to the content in the DLC. But then again, if they were there, maybe Kieran doesn't complete this part of his story arc where he is overcome by his bitterness and frustrations. And it is still possible that we'll see them in the next DLC release. Time will tell. That being said, it's easy to respect Kieran's drive to get better and want to see him overcome a lot of the negative feelings he's going through. If there is one major thing I wanted more out of the DLC, it was a little more from Briar's character. There is nothing wrong with her, and she does have a top-tier design. But it feels like they were holding back a little too much with the character at times. It feels like there's some more lore that they're really waiting to show more of. And I'm excited to see what else we might learn about the Blueberry Academy, and possibly learn other little things we didn't know about the other regions, as long as it feels organic, of course. Then there's the mascot for the Teal Mask, Ogerpon. I wasn't really feeling it at first going into the DLC, but I grew to like it a lot more by the end. The different masks it can hold are pretty cool, and its actual in-game stats spread is pretty good. I enjoy a speedy, strong Pokemon archetype. I also think with the Heartflame mask, it makes for a more interesting grass-fire type than Scovillain, though they're not meant to be all that comparable in spite of the chance to make Ogerpon the same type combo. Lore-wise, it kind of feels like another character that you're able to feel sympathetic for. And it's another piece of the puzzle that forms the overall story themes of Scarlet and Violet. Speaking of the Pokemon in this DLC, I also like the stuff with the Loyal 3. I wasn't expecting them at all to be the bad Pokemon. Though, in hindsight, maybe I should have seen it coming. I enjoy a good false hero narrative in these games. Also, Okidagi kind of looks like the Gruntilda recolored Banjo has in Smash. I don't know. I've never played Banjo, but that resemblance is uncanny, even if it's just because of the color spread alone. Pheasantipity is actually my favorite design of the trio, however. I overall just like the fact that it's based on a bird, and serendipity is pheasantipity, I guess. Next, I'd like to talk about the environment a bit. While some of it isn't overtly trying to be different from the base game, the festival and many things related to it are among the nicest areas in the game. Something about them just feels cozy, and I liked all the treats the player could buy. The festival itself isn't the most special thing ever, but there's something about it that I think is really nice, as well as some of the town areas. Unfortunately, the game is still a victim of poor optimization and limitations, and you can tell there definitely could be more in these areas. But I think it's some of the best use of the game's art in Gen 9 so far. I don't have too much to say gameplay-wise. There is a decent amount of new content here, but it's not the most battle-focused part of Scarlet and Violet. Unless you're going to catch literally every new Pokemon, I guess. But for the main game, there is a lot of traveling and story. Yes, there's still the battles you expect, and it does partly depend on how you choose to play things out. But I expect the Indigo Disc to be much more battle heavy than this was. But we can talk about that when we get there, as it's still a while away. Also, one other thing is the difficulty of the DLC. It's really easy, specifically depending on your team going into it. I do not recommend going into this DLC with a bunch of level 80 plus Pokemon at the start, unless you're just trying to blast through it as fast as possible. But going in with a newer team will make it feel more engaging overall, and I do suggest going that route. Hence, I actually uploaded a best team yesterday. This advice is only for those that have completed the 3 main stories in the base game, as the leveling scales based on that. But if you've been playing Scarlet and Violet to death and are planning on going in with your super optimized team of level 100s, you might want to change your mind. It doesn't help that some of the high-level Pokemon battles at the start are things like a level 60 Poochyena and not even Mightyena. I understand the need to want to ramp things up slowly, but I gotta say, that really took me off guard, since that's such a weird level for it. Get ready to eat dirt? Okay, you have a Poochyena, dude. I don't think you're, I'm kind of disappointed. Like, why don't you have anything else? Like, I'm gonna literally smoke you like there's no tomorrow. Overall, the DLC took me just under 5 hours to get through, though I definitely have some stuff left to do. It was generally a pretty humble experience, but also a nice one as well. And in the end, I did find this more interesting than Sword and Shield's DLC because of how it connects to the main game in a more interesting way. At least to me anyway. I'm not attacking anyone that likes the Sword and Shield DLC more, of course. It's just that I'm personally happy that I'm continuing to find Scarlet and Violet something I can go back to and enjoy. So I give this DLC a thumbs up for sure. It's good, in spite of the technical issues that still plague the game's performance and visual potential. And I just had fun going through it, and I'm really excited for the next part of the DLC. And those are my final thoughts on the Teal Mask. The bottom line, it's not bad. And if you already like Scarlet and Violet, then you have no reason not to re-immerse yourself in it. But for those of you that finished it, what'd you think? Did you enjoy the Teal Mask DLC? Anything you would change? What do you guys think of Carmine and Kieran? What do you think will happen next in the Indigo Disc? Let me know down below.